Willow Street was the kind of place most people passed without noticing. A narrow road tucked behind a row of shuttered shops. It was lined with houses that leaned tiredly against one another, as if sharing the burden of their years. The smallest house, number 47, belonged to the Alvarez family. It was a two-bedroom shack with peeling paint, drafty windows, and a porch that sagged like an old man's shoulders. Yet inside, warmth hummed in the laughter of its inhabitants. Daniel Alvarez, barely 10, sat cross-legged on the floor with a stub of pencil and the back of a grocery receipt. Numbers fascinated him. He would scribble multiplication tables for fun, making little games out of patterns no one else cared about. To Daniel, numbers weren't cold or stern. They were alive, full of rhythm, like music waiting to be played. His mother, Lucia, often found him murmuring to himself as he wrote. "Another code, Danny?" she asked, setting down a basket of laundry. Daniel's face lit up. "It's not a code, Mama. It's like music, but with numbers. Look, see how the 3s and 9s dance together?" Lucia smiled, though she didn't fully understand. Her hands were calloused from scrubbing floors at the hotel downtown, but she always reached out gently to smooth her son's unruly hair. "One day, hijo, maybe those numbers will take you further than this street." His father, Mateo, was less poetic. A construction worker with arms thick from years of labor, he admired his son's cleverness but worried about practicality. "Dreams don't put food on the table," he'd mutter, watching Daniel's doodles. Still, beneath the gruffness, there was pride. A secret hope that maybe, just maybe, Daniel's mind would escape the trap of poverty that had bound generations of Alvarez's. Evenings in the Alvarez house were noisy affairs. Lucia would hum boleros while stirring beans on the stove. Mateo would grumble about long hours under the sun, and Daniel's younger sister Marisol would chase their stray cat around the kitchen. Amid it all, Daniel would retreat into his world of numbers and rhythm, the sounds of his family forming a kind of backdrop to the calculations running through his mind. It wasn't until one rainy afternoon, however, that Daniel discovered the thing that would change everything. He had been sent to fetch an umbrella from the neighbor's garage, an elderly widow named Mrs. Kent, who often forgot she'd promised to lend things out. The garage smelled of dust and oil, but there, half hidden under a tarp, stood an upright piano. Its varnish was cracked, keys yellowed with age. Daniel approached it as though it were a sleeping animal. Tentatively, he pressed one key. A dull, slightly out-of-tune note rang out. He pressed another, then another. The sound vibrated through his small body, sparking something he had never felt before. It wasn't numbers this time. It was something larger, richer. "Careful with that, boy," Mrs. Kent's voice rasped from behind him. She had shuffled in quietly. Daniel spun around, stammering, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" But the old woman waved a hand. "No harm done. Thing hasn't been played in decades." Her gaze softened as she saw the boy's wide eyes fixed on the instrument. "You like it?" Daniel nodded, speechless. Mrs. Kent sighed. "Take a seat then, just don't break it." And so he did. His fingers, clumsy and uncertain, tapped out a simple rhythm. It was nothing, random notes, halting and awkward, but to Daniel, it was magic. He felt as though he had stumbled onto a secret language that belonged only to him. That evening, when he told his parents about the piano, Mateo shook his head. "Don't go filling the boy's head with foolishness," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Lucia, however, saw the light in her son's eyes. She tucked him into bed with an unspoken prayer that somehow, in a world that rarely gave to families like theirs, a door might open for him. Daniel fell asleep that night, replaying the sounds in his head. Numbers still danced for him, but now they carried melodies. He didn't know it yet, but the smallest house on Willow Street had just given birth to a dream that would carry him far beyond its cracked walls. The next week, Daniel found excuses to pass by Mrs. Kent's garage. He would claim he was chasing the cat, or looking for Marisol, or simply taking a walk. Each time he hoped to catch the old woman outside, broom in hand, so he could linger near that piano. Mrs. Kent noticed, of course. She had been a schoolteacher once, before arthritis bent her fingers and age slowed her step. Though stern on the surface, she carried a soft spot for curiosity. One afternoon, when rain drummed gently on the tin roof, she gestured toward the garage. "Go on then," she said. "It won't play itself." Daniel's heart leapt. He rushed inside, wiping his wet shoes before sitting down on the rickety stool. His small hands hovered over the keys. He pressed one, then another, arranging them like puzzle pieces. The sounds clashed at first, awkward and raw, but slowly, painfully slowly, he began to find patterns. "Try this." Mrs. Kent shuffled closer, humming a simple tune. She tapped the rhythm with her cane. Daniel followed, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. For the first time, someone was guiding him, opening the door wider to that secret world he had stumbled upon. From then on, their afternoons became lessons. Mrs. Kent wasn't a trained musician, but she remembered enough nursery songs and hymns to teach Daniel basics, scales, chords, the importance of listening as much as playing. Daniel absorbed everything like a sponge. His eyes narrowed in concentration, his tongue sometimes peeking from the corner of his mouth as he worked through mistakes. And when a phrase finally clicked, when the notes flowed smooth instead of stumbling, his grin lit the dim garage brighter than the bare bulb overhead. At home, though, things weren't so simple. Mateo grew uneasy. "You can't waste hours banging on that broken piano," he grumbled. "You should be studying something useful. Numbers, science, things that might give you work one day." "But Papa," Daniel protested, "music is numbers. It's patterns and rhythm. It's all connected." Mateo shook his head, unconvinced. The world had taught him harsh lessons. Dreams were fragile, easily crushed beneath bills and hunger. He didn't want his son to build his life on something so uncertain. Lucia, however, quietly defended Daniel. "He's not hurting anyone. Let him play." Her voice carried that gentle firmness Mateo rarely challenged. Still, worry hung in the air like a storm cloud. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Daniel sat awake, tapping invisible notes on his blanket. He remembered Mrs. Kent's words earlier that day. "Every song tells a story, Daniel. And every story begins with someone brave enough to believe it's worth telling," he whispered to himself, as though making a vow. "I'll be brave. I'll tell mine." Days turned to weeks, and Daniel's playing grew stronger. He invented little tunes of his own, shaping melodies that surprised even Mrs. Kent. One morning she leaned back in her chair and studied him with quiet amazement. "You know, boy," she said, "you might just have a gift. Don't waste it." Daniel's chest swelled with pride, but also fear. A gift was heavy. It meant responsibility. And though he didn't yet understand how, he sensed this piano, this old forgotten relic, might be the key to changing everything. The smallest house on Willow Street could not hold the size of his growing dream. The announcement came on a grey Monday morning. "Attention, students!" crackled the old intercom at Willow Elementary. "The annual talent show will be held this Friday evening in the gymnasium. Sign-up sheets are on the bulletin board by the cafeteria." Most kids groaned, a few cheered, but Daniel sat very still at his desk, his pencil frozen above his math worksheet. His heart beat fast, too fast. A stage, a piano, a chance to show everyone what he had learned, but also the chance to fail in front of them all. That afternoon, as children crowded the bulletin board, Daniel lingered at the edge. He could almost hear Mrs. Kent's voice urging him forward. Every story begins with someone brave enough. Before he knew it, His name appeared in crooked letters on the sign-up sheet. Daniel Alvarez, piano. At home, the news landed with mixed reactions. "You did what?" Mateo nearly dropped his spoon into his stew. "A show? In front of everyone?" Daniel swallowed hard but stood firm. "Yes, Papa. I want to play." Lucia touched her husband's arm. "Let him try. Maybe people will see what we already know." Mateo frowned but said nothing more. Later that night, Daniel caught him standing quietly at the doorway as he tapped rhythms on the kitchen table, practicing finger movements on imaginary keys. The week rushed by. Each afternoon, Daniel hurried to Mrs. Kent's garage, practicing until his fingers ached. The piano was still out of tune, a little broken, but his determination filled in the cracks. He chose a simple melody he had shaped himself, something gentle, rising like dawn, then strong, like the march of hope. Friday arrived. The gymnasium glowed under buzzing fluorescent lights. Folding chairs lined the walls. Parents and neighbors crowded in, their voices mingling in a nervous hum. Kids performed dances, told jokes and juggled. Laughter and applause filled the room, but Daniel barely noticed. His stomach was knotted tight. When his name was called, his legs felt like wood. He walked to the piano on stage, a black upright, chipped but sturdier than Mrs. Kent's relic. The keys gleamed under the lights. He sat down, his feet barely touching the pedals. For a heartbeat he froze. He looked out and saw faces, classmates smirking, teachers whispering, his mother clasping her hands, his father stone-faced, arms crossed. Then, at the back of the room, Mrs. Kent gave the smallest nod. Daniel took a deep breath, placed his fingers on the keys, and began. The first notes trembled, thin as a whisper. The audience shifted, restless, but then the melody took shape, fragile, then swelling, weaving its way through the gym like a thread of gold. Daniel closed his eyes, lost in the sound. His fingers moved with confidence, guided not by sheet music but by heart. By the time the last chord rang, the room was silent. For a moment, Daniel thought he had failed, that no one cared. But then, a single clap broke the stillness. Then another. And suddenly, the gym roared with applause. Lucia's eyes brimmed with tears. Even Mateo's stern face softened, his hands finally joining in. Daniel's cheeks burned with joy. For the first time, his dream wasn't hidden. It was alive, out in the open, and people had listened. Afterward, as students gathered their things, one of the teachers approached. "You've got real talent, Daniel," she said warmly. "I'll speak with the principal. Maybe we can find a way to get you proper lessons." The words wrapped around him like a blanket. Proper lessons, a real chance. As Daniel walked home that night, his little family close by, he felt taller than the streetlights. The world had tilted slightly in his favor. But dreams, he would soon learn, often come with shadows. The Saturday morning after the talent show, the Alvarez home was buzzing. Neighbors who had been at the gym stopped by to congratulate Daniel. Someone even dropped off a bag of pastries with a note, "For the little pianist, keep shining." Daniel glowed under the attention, but Mateo kept his distance. He sat at the kitchen table, sipping bitter coffee, eyes fixed on the window. "You played beautifully," Lucia said, stroking her son's hair. "Thank you, Mama," Daniel replied, still tasting the applause in his ears. When he glanced at his father, though, the silence pressed hard. That evening, during dinner, the tension spilled. "So," Mateo began, his fork clinking against the plate, "now everyone thinks my son is some kind of star." Lucia frowned. "He has a gift, Mateo. Why fight it?" Mateo shook his head. "Because gifts don't pay bills. Do you know what lessons cost? What a piano costs? We can't afford these fantasies." Daniel lowered his eyes. His hands, still aching from practice, curled into fists. "I can work harder," Lucia said softly. "We'll find a way." "No." Mateo's voice was sharp. This boy needs to learn the world isn't made of dreams. Music won't put food on the table. The words hit Daniel like stones. He excused himself quietly, retreating to his room, where the glow of yesterday's triumph dimmed to grey. But while Mateo's doubts grew heavier, the outside world leaned in closer. On Monday, the principal called Daniel to her office. "We've been contacted by the Community Arts Foundation," she explained, adjusting her glasses. "They offer scholarships for talented children. I'd like to recommend you." Daniel's chest tightened. A scholarship? Free lessons? His heart soared, but then he thought of his father's glare. That evening, he told his mother, Lucia's face lit up like dawn. "This is it, mi amor. This is what you've been waiting for." But when Mateo heard, his chair scraped against the floor. "Enough!" he thundered. Scholarships, sponsors, strangers deciding his future. He belongs here, with his family, working, learning something useful. "Mateo," Lucia whispered, her voice trembling, "don't you see? This is useful. This is his chance." Their argument crackled through the walls, searing Daniel's ears. He sat by the door, hugging his knees, torn between hope and guilt. The week wore on. Daniel practiced in secret at Mrs. Kent's garage, his fingers racing across chipped keys. She listened quietly, sometimes closing her eyes as though transported to another time. "You play as if you're trying to outrun something," she said one afternoon. Daniel hesitated. "Maybe I am." She laid a wrinkled hand on his shoulder. "Then run toward the light, not away from it." By Friday, the scholarship committee had arranged a small audition. Just Daniel, a borrowed piano, and a handful of judges. Lucia insisted on going with him. Mateo refused. "You'll regret this," he muttered, pulling his cap low. "The world doesn't hand out miracles." At the audition, Daniel sat trembling. The piano was grand, polished, nothing like Mrs. Kent's. He thought of his father's words, of the cracked roof above their beds, of bills stacked on the counter. He thought of disappointment heavy as iron. Then he thought of the gymnasium applause, of his mother's tears, of Mrs. Kent's nod, and he played. This time, the music wasn't gentle. It rose fierce, storming, like a river breaking through stone. He poured every fear, every doubt, every quiet dream into the keys until his chest heaved with the effort. When the last chord rang, the room stayed hushed. Then, slowly, one of the judges smiled. "Daniel," she said softly, "we'd be honored to have you in our program." He had won. Yet even in victory, a shadow lingered. On the walk home, Daniel's heart raced with joy, but also dread, because now he had to face his father. The scholarship letter arrived on a Tuesday, sealed with an official stamp that made Daniel's hands tremble. He tore it open in the kitchen while his mother dried dishes. "Congratulations," it read. "You have been awarded full tuition at the Riverside Music Academy." Lucia clasped her hands over her mouth. "Dios mío! Daniel, you did it!" She hugged him so tightly he could barely breathe. But when Mateo came home from his shift and saw the envelope, the celebration soured. Dinner that night was a battlefield disguised as a meal. Lucia laid the letter on the table, her voice calm but firm. "Mateo, they're offering everything. Lessons, instruments, even transportation. This is no burden for us. It's a blessing." Mateo's jaw clenched. He stabbed at his beans, not meeting his son's eyes. "Blessing or distraction? You think men at the mill get to play piano instead of working? He's 14. He should learn responsibility, not chase applause." Daniel's fork froze halfway to his mouth. His throat tightened. "I can still help, Papa. I can practice and work. I'll do both." Mateo slammed his fist against the table, rattling the plates. "No son of mine will waste his life on stage tricks." The words cut sharper than any knife. Silence wrapped the room. Lucia's eyes burned with quiet fire. "Stage tricks," she whispered. "Matteo, can you not see what God has given him? This isn't a trick. It's a gift." That night, Daniel lay awake listening to their muffled voices through the thin walls. His father's tone, rough, unbending. His mother's, pleading, breaking. He pressed a pillow over his ears, but the echoes seeped in. Waste of time. Dreams don't feed families. Music is not survival. Yet another voice whispered in him, faint but steady. "But it is who you are." The next afternoon he went to Mrs. Kent's garage with the scholarship letter folded in his pocket. She listened as he explained his father's rejection, his mother's defense, his own confusion. When he finished, she set her teacup down gently. "Do you know why I kept this piano?" she asked. "My husband was a violinist. We were poor, too. Everyone told him it was foolish, but his music carried us through wars, through hunger, through grief. Music doesn't fill the stomach, Daniel, but it keeps the soul alive." Daniel's eyes blurred. "But what if my father never forgives me?" "Mrs. Kent smiled sadly. "Then one day you'll play in a hall full of strangers, and he'll hear you, and maybe then he'll understand." The weekend came, and with it, the Academy's orientation. Lucia insisted Daniel go. Matteo refused to accompany them. On the bus ride to Riverside, Daniel clutched his mother's hand. The Academy loomed ahead, a sprawling building of glass and stone, buzzing with students carrying cases and sheet music. His heart pounded. Inside, instructors welcomed them, praising Daniel's audition. They handed him schedules, music scores, even a practice uniform. For the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere larger than his neighborhood. But in the back of his mind, one thought gnawed. What will Papa say when I get home? That evening, Matteo sat in the dim kitchen waiting. When Daniel and Lucia entered, his eyes were dark pools. "Well?" he asked. Lucia lifted her chin. "He starts next week." Matteo's fist curled, then opened slowly. His voice was low, dangerous. "If he goes through with this, he is no longer under my roof." Daniel's breath caught. The floor seemed to tilt beneath him. "Papa, please." But Matteo stood, grabbed his jacket, and left the house without another word. Daniel collapsed into a chair, trembling. His mother wrapped her arms around him, whispering through tears, "Mi hijo, sometimes the ones we love most are the ones who fear our wings." He buried his face in her shoulder. For the first time, joy and heartbreak sat together in his chest. Daniel's first morning at Riverside Music Academy smelled of varnished floors, old paper, and polished brass. Students hurried down hallways with instrument cases strapped to their backs like wings. Daniel clutched the Academy's welcome packet in one hand and the strap of his worn backpack in the other. His clothes were plain compared to the crisp uniforms around him, but he walked tall. For the first time in weeks, he felt like his footsteps belonged to him alone. The rehearsal hall was a cathedral of sound, sunlight pouring through tall windows, every wall echoing with scales, arpeggios, and the chaotic chatter of young musicians tuning up. An instructor with silver-rimmed glasses approached. "You must be Daniel Alvarez," he said, checking his list. "The Prodigy from Maplewood." Daniel flushed. I don't know about Prodigy." The man smiled. "We'll see. Take your seat at the piano." Daniel slid onto the bench, hands hovering above the ivory keys. For a moment, doubt pressed down on him. What if I don't belong here? What if Papa was right? Then he pressed a chord, firm, steady, and the sound rang like a promise. The room hushed. A few students turned to look. The instructor's lips curved upward. "Yes," he murmured. "You'll do well here." Over the next hours, Daniel plunged into lessons, theory classes where chalk dust floated like snow, ear-training drills that left his mind spinning, ensemble rehearsals where violins and cellos wrapped around his piano like vines. He stumbled at first, struggling to sight-read fast enough to follow the conductor's sharp gestures, but each mistake became fuel. By afternoon, sweat beaded his brow, his fingers ached, and he felt more alive than ever. During a break, a tall boy with messy hair plopped down beside him. "Hey! You're the new guy, right? The one who played Chopin like it was a street song." Daniel blinked. "Street song?" The boy grinned. "Yeah, like you pulled it straight out of a corner cafe. I'm Aaron. Violin." Daniel laughed for the first time that day. "Daniel, piano." "Stick with me, Daniel. Around here, you'll need a friend." That evening, when he returned home, Matteo was nowhere to be found. The air in the house felt heavy, as if silence itself disapproved of his joy. Lucia sat waiting at the kitchen table. She studied his flushed cheeks, his sparkling eyes. "You liked it," she said softly. "I loved it," Daniel whispered. Then, after a pause, "But Papa..." Her smile faltered, but she reached for his hand. "Your father loves you more than his own pride can admit. One day, Daniel, one day he'll see." Days became weeks. Daniel rose before dawn, helping his mother with chores, then caught the bus to the academy. He practiced until his wrists throbbed, then returned home to find his father's seat empty more often than not. But something was changing inside him. Each lesson, each applause from classmates, each nod from instructors built a foundation stronger than the doubt Matteo had planted. He wasn't just playing notes anymore. He was building a future. One Friday evening, Mrs. Kent knocked on their door. She carried a wrapped package. "For you, Daniel," she said, eyes twinkling. Inside was a second-hand metronome, polished until it gleamed. "You'll need it," she said. "Every great musician learns to keep time, not just with music, but with patience." Daniel hugged her, whispering, "Thank you." And for the first time in weeks, Matteo's voice echoed faintly from down the street, calling to a neighbor. Daniel's heart clenched. Would his father ever walk into a concert hall and hear him play? That night, lying in bed, he turned the metronome in his hands. The steady tick-tock filled the room when he set it in motion. It was as if time itself whispered, "Keep going. No matter who turns away, the music must go on." Daniel closed his eyes, and in the darkness, he imagined a stage bathed in light. His father seated somewhere in the crowd, listening at last. By October, Daniel had become a name whispered in the corridors of Riverside Music Academy. Professors asked him to demonstrate during lectures, classmates lingered near practice rooms to hear him play, and even older students nodded with grudging respect. But with the attention came something colder: envy. It started subtly. Sheet music missing from his folder, a practice room mysteriously locked when it was his turn, snickers behind his back when he tripped on a rushed entrance. One afternoon, Aaron leaned close during orchestra rehearsal. "Don't look now, but Marcus has it out for you." Daniel followed his gaze. Marcus, a senior pianist with sharp cheekbones and a sharper tongue, was glaring at him across the room. "Why?" Daniel asked, bewildered. Aaron smirked. "Because you play like you mean it, and he plays like he's trying to prove something." A week later, Marcus cornered him in the hallway. "You think you can just waltz in from your little town and steal the spotlight?" His voice was low, but his words struck like blows. Daniel's stomach tightened. "I didn't steal anything, I'm just working hard," Marcus sneered. "Hard work won't save you when the auditions come. Professors won't gamble on a charity case." Daniel froze. Charity case. The words cut deep, dragging up every sacrifice his family had made. The patched clothes, the unpaid bills, the way Matteo's eyes hardened each time tuition was mentioned. But before Daniel could answer, Aaron appeared, violin case slung casually over his shoulder. Funny, Aaron said. For someone so threatened by a charity case, you sure spend a lot of time worrying about him. Marcus's lips curled, but he walked away, muttering under his breath. That night, Daniel sat at the piano in the empty practice hall. His fingers trembled as he pressed the keys. Every note came out jagged, as if reflecting his unease. Do I really belong here? Or am I just a charity case with borrowed time? Then he remembered Mrs. Kent's metronome. He set it ticking beside the piano, steady and patient. The rhythm steadied his pulse. Slowly, his music smoothed, sadness weaving into beauty, doubt turning into resilience. He didn't stop until midnight, when the janitor tapped the door and told him to go home. The following week brought auditions for the Academy's Winter Gala, the grandest performance of the year, a chance for students to shine before visiting conductors, patrons, and critics. Daniel signed his name with trembling hands. Aaron clapped his shoulder. "This is it! You're going to blow them away!" Daniel swallowed hard. "Unless Marcus gets to me first." Aaron grinned, then played louder than his jealousy. At home, the tension grew. Matteo's silence was heavier than ever, his absence more frequent. One evening, Daniel overheard him telling Lucia, "He's dreaming too big. One failure and he'll break." Daniel retreated to his room, heart aching. Yet when he opened his music folder, he found a note tucked between the pages. "Play like you did that night on the old church piano." M. He frowned. M. His father's handwriting. The strokes were familiar but shaky. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered. Maybe Papa was listening more than I thought. The day of auditions arrived. The hall buzzed with anticipation, chairs filled with students, faculty, and a panel of judges at the front. Marcus performed first, his fingers a blur, each note sharp as glass. The audience applauded politely. Then came Daniel. He walked onto the stage, heart hammering, palms damp. He bowed, sat, and touched the keys. For a moment, silence. Then, music. He didn't just play. He told a story. The struggles of Maplewood, the laughter of his sister, his mother's tired hands, his father's silence, the gift of a metronome ticking in the dark. His music rose and fell like a confession, aching yet full of light. When the final chord faded, the hall stood still. Then, applause, thunderous, rising. Daniel looked up. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw Matteo's face in the back row, watching. But when he blinked, the seat was empty. That night, Daniel received the news. He'd been chosen as one of the gala's soloists. Aaron whooped, lifting him off the ground. "Told you." But Daniel only smiled faintly. The victory was sweet, but the shadow of Marcus's glare and his father's absence lingered, waiting to test him again. The first snow of December blanketed Riverside Academy in silver. Students hurried across the courtyard, their instruments hugged close against the cold. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. The Winter Gala was more than a concert. It was a showcase, a chance to be noticed, maybe even discovered. For Daniel, it was everything. In the weeks leading up, he practiced relentlessly. Morning, afternoon, late into the night, the piano keys wore grooves into his fingertips. Aaron often joined, violin case in hand, teasing, "If you don't eat, you'll collapse before the downbeat." But Daniel's mind wasn't just on the music. He carried heavier weights. The landlord's letter about overdue rent sat folded in his backpack. Lucia's cough had worsened in the chill, and Matteo's absence stretched into something almost unbearable. Still, Daniel clung to the memory of the note he'd found in his music folder, "Play like you did that night on the old church piano." Every time doubt surged, he whispered those words like a prayer. The evening of the gala arrived. The grand hall shimmered with chandeliers, velvet curtains, and rows of expectant faces, donors, critics, strangers who held the power to alter futures. Backstage, Daniel's hands trembled. Marcus passed by, his smirk sharp as a blade. "Try not to embarrass yourself, Prodigy," he whispered. Aaron leaned in after him. "Ignore him. Play your story, not his." Daniel nodded, though his stomach churned. The orchestra opened with a sweeping overture. Then came chamber groups, duets, and solos. Each performance drew polite applause, the kind given out of respect rather than wonder. Finally, Daniel's name was called. He stepped onto the stage. The lights burned bright, blinding. He sat at the piano, heartbeat racing louder than any applause. For a moment, fear froze him. His mind flashed with Matteo's words, "One failure, and he'll break." Then he remembered the church piano, the cracked wood, the flickering candles, the way music had filled a hollow night with light. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and began. His fingers wove a tapestry of sound, quiet at first, like snowfall, then swelling into a storm. The melody carried fragments of Maplewood streets, Lucia's laughter, Aaron's friendship, his mother's sacrifice, and even Matteo's silence. It was not perfect. His hand slipped once. A note rang sharper than intended, but the flaws made it real, human, and it moved the room. People leaned forward. A hush fell, broken only by the rise and fall of his music. When he struck the final chord, the sound hung in the air like a held breath before dissolving into thunderous applause. Daniel rose, bowing low, chest heaving. In the sea of faces, one caught him off guard. Matteo. His father stood near the back, cap in hand, eyes glistening. He didn't clap, but his gaze, steady, unflinching, met Daniel's with something Daniel had longed for: recognition. Then Matteo turned and left, disappearing into the crowd. After the performance, Daniel was swarmed. Professors praised him, strangers asked his name, Aaron practically dragged him into an embrace. "You killed it, Daniel." Aaron broke off, overwhelmed. "That was everything." Daniel smiled, but his thoughts lingered on Matteo's fleeting figure. Why had he come only to vanish again? That night, Daniel returned to Maplewood. The apartment was quiet. Lucia was asleep on the couch, a blanket tucked under her chin. His mother, weary but smiling, kissed his forehead. "You played beautifully," she whispered. "I could feel it." But Matteo's chair at the table sat empty. A single envelope lay there instead, marked with Daniel's name. Hands trembling, he opened it. Inside, a note in Matteo's handwriting. "Son, tomorrow we need to talk. There are things you don't know. Things about why I left music and why I fear it for you. Meet me at the river at dawn." Daniel's pulse quickened. A secret, a truth buried in silence. The winter gala had given him a stage, but the next day might give him answers that could change everything. Dawn crept quietly over Maplewood, painting the river in shades of gold and grey. Frost clung to the grass, and the air smelled of wood smoke and silence. Daniel walked with his coat pulled tight, clutching the envelope from the night before. His heart thudded with every step. At the edge of the river, Matteo was already there, leaning against the old railing, cap pulled low, shoulders hunched as if bracing against a storm. He turned when Daniel approached. "You came," Matteo said, voice rough but steady. "I almost didn't," Daniel admitted. "But you asked, and I need answers." Matteo's eyes softened. "Then you'll have them." For a long moment the only sound was the river's slow current. Finally, Matteo spoke. "When I was your age, music was my whole world. I played guitar, wrote songs, chased stages the way other men chase paychecks. Your grandfather hated it. He thought music was weakness, distraction. But your grandmother, she believed in me." Daniel's breath caught. He had never heard this story. Matteo continued, gaze fixed on the water. "I played in bars, little halls, anywhere that would let me. One night, I got my chance, an audition with a touring band. It was everything I dreamed of." His voice cracked. "But that night, there was an accident. Your grandmother was driving home from work. I should have been there. Instead, I was chasing a stage. She never made it home." Silence settled heavy between them. Daniel's throat tightened. "That broke me," Matteo whispered. "I put down the guitar, swore never to touch music again. I married, I worked, I tried to build a life. But when you started playing piano, it was like watching history repeat. I was terrified you'd choose music and lose everything like I did." Daniel's eyes stung. "So, all this time, you stayed away because you were scared of me being like you?" Matteo nodded, shame etched in every line of his face. "I thought distance would protect you. But hearing you last night, Daniel, you weren't chasing a stage. You were telling a story, carrying everyone you love in each note. I realized maybe music doesn't have to destroy. Maybe it can heal." Daniel's chest ached with 1,000 tangled feelings. Sorrow, anger, relief. "You should have told me sooner." "I know." Matteo's voice broke. "I was a coward. I can't give you back the years I missed, but I don't want to miss another." For a moment, Daniel stared at him, the man who had abandoned music and in many ways him. The wound was deep, but so was the yearning. Slowly, Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a folded piece of sheet music. "This is the song I played last night. It isn't perfect, but maybe it's ours now, not just mine." Matteo hesitated, then took the paper in trembling hands. His eyes scanned the notes, and a tear slipped free. "I can't promise I'll be the father you deserved," he said softly. "But I can try to be the one you need now." Daniel swallowed hard. "That's enough for me." They stood by the river until the sun climbed higher, its light spilling over the town like forgiveness. For the first time in years, Daniel felt as if the silence between them had cracked, like music waiting to be played. As they walked back toward Maplewood together, Daniel realized something. His story was no longer just about proving himself. It was about carrying forward a legacy, broken, mended, unfinished, but alive. And the final chapter of his journey was yet to be written. The morning of the scholarship decision arrived with the weight of destiny. The envelope sat on Daniel's desk, edges already worn from being handled too many times. He could still hear the roar of the auditorium, the letters of acceptance from prestigious schools, the voices of people telling him, "This is your chance." And yet, his heart was split. At the kitchen table, his mother poured coffee into 2 mugs, setting one in front of him. Her eyes were gentle but sharp. "You've been quiet, son. What's on your mind?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know if I should go. The scholarship, it's everything we dreamed of. But now, with Dad, with the community here, I don't want to just walk away." His mother sipped her coffee, then smiled softly. "Dreams don't always mean leaving. Sometimes they mean bringing light where you already are." That afternoon, Daniel found Matteo in the garage, dusting off an old guitar. The sight startled him, his father's hands trembling over strings he hadn't touched in decades. "You're really going to play again?" Daniel asked. Matteo gave a sheepish grin. "Maybe. Not for crowds, not for fame. For family. For me. I forgot what it felt like to let music breathe instead of burying it." Daniel watched as his father strummed a hesitant chord. Something fragile but alive filled the air. For the first time, he didn't see a broken man. He saw someone learning to heal. That night, the town gathered in the church hall for a farewell concert. Word had spread that Daniel might be leaving. Neighbors, teachers, friends, they all crowded the wooden benches, faces glowing in the candlelight. Daniel sat at the piano, heart pounding. He looked out at the sea of familiar faces, then at Matteo, standing quietly near the back. He leaned into the microphone. This song isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us, about home and the choices that shape us. The first notes rang out, rich, steady, full of longing and hope. Halfway through, Daniel surprised everyone by nodding toward his father. "Dad," he said, "join me." Gasps rippled through the room. Matteo hesitated, then walked forward, guitar in hand. His fingers shook as he strummed, but when their melodies intertwined, piano and guitar weaving together, the hall erupted in something bigger than music. It was forgiveness, set to harmony. The next morning, Daniel sat by the river with the scholarship letter in hand. He opened it one last time, reading the words that promised a future far from Maplewood. Then, slowly, he folded the paper and tucked it into his journal. He had made his decision. Daniel would stay. Not because he lacked ambition, but because he had found a greater calling, teaching music to children in Maplewood, giving them the stage he once dreamed of, and carrying forward the legacy of both pain and redemption his family carried. And perhaps, one day, the world beyond Maplewood would still hear his music through the voices and hands of those he had taught. Years later, people would remember that night in the church hall as the moment the silence broke. They would speak of the boy who could have left but chose to stay, the father who picked up his guitar again, and the music that stitched together a family and a town. And Daniel, sitting at the piano in a classroom filled with laughter and out-of-tune scales, would smile, knowing he had chosen the right song for his life. The prodigy had not vanished. He had simply found a new stage. And the melody went on,